Welcome to Phil and Ted's Sexy Boomer Show. I'm Ted Bonnet.
I'm Phil Proctor, and we just listened to the late Peter Bergman and the still alive and kicking David Osman. Dave's going to be coming down here, and I think we'll get him on one of the shows. He lives up on Whidbey Island, but we're doing a project. I guess is it secret? Yes, it's for the... and it sounds very exciting, but we will be working together at that. He's playing the part of the... and I'm doing the... and as well. So
I certainly hope they have a budget for the prawns.
Well, it'd be because otherwise he'll be down here for no reason at all,
Hey, we didn't sell these during the pledge.
Yeah, well, the pledge is over.
Yeah, no pledging. No pledging.
And although I pledge we're going to have a great show because my dear friend Lawrence Kubick is here today, who really represents, to me, Hollywood history.
Yes.
Lawrence, you are Hollywood history.
You were
starting as an actor and then becoming an agent and a manager over a great long period of time. And a producer. And I just want to talk a little bit about our personal relationship. First of all, Lawrence now lives across the street, pretty much from where I live.
Cheap talent.
Right. And you own what, 3 houses on that street?
Yeah.
Yep. And I think I visited all of them when I was growing up. I've been on that street this is a street in Benedict Canyon. I've been there for 50 years, really, now. And I remember I met Arnold Schwarzenegger in your swimming pool, right? And, well, anyway, we'll get into those stories.
You met Arnold Schwarzenegger in his swimming pool?
Yes. He lifted my then-wife, Barbaro, right out of the water. I have a picture of it somewhere.
Before he was the governor.
It was before he was the governor.
That's right. As a talent manager and agent, you worked with some really interesting people in the early days of their career. Arnold Schwarzenegger, Sylvester Stallone.
Firesign Theater.
You cut the Rocky deal. We're going to talk about that because that's a hell of a story.
But that's how we met. We met on the Firesign Theater when the Firesign Theater was hired to reimagine a script called Zachariah.
So, we want to talk about this era of Hollywood that you were immersed in, which is just fascinating, and the people you worked with, including Peter Fonda, Jon Voight.
But originally you were a Bronx boy.
Yeah,
that's true. And your
born
folks
in the Bronx.
Born in the Bronx, and your folks were in vaudeville, which I really didn't know about you.
Well, vaudeville my father was in vaudeville in England, in London.
Oh,
and. He started when he was a kid, dancing on street corners for tuppence, as he used to say.
Right. Wow.
But he had worked with Archibald.
Who changed his name?
He changed his name to Cary Grant. He was known better by that name.
Leach.
Archie Leach was his name.
Right.
Yeah. And
that was a good call to change the name from Leach.
Well, I don't think there was a lot of work for Archie because he used to dance on stilts. That was his act.
That was his
Cary
act.
Grant started on stilts.
Dancing on stilts.
Holy Moses.
Yeah.
Wow.
I just saw his second movie last night with Mae West. She Done Him Wrong.
That's right, yeah.
Okay? And a fresh-faced young character actor. But, athletic. He was an athlete.
Amazing athlete.
Like as we said earlier, Katharine Hepburn.
My dad started in vaudeville.
Yeah.
And my mother was on Broadway when she was 15.
Wow.
She was in a company called the Gus Edwards Show.
Yeah.
Which was like Ziegfeld.
Mm.
And she was only like 5'2", maybe.
Huh.
But she was so small, they would put her at the end of the line. So you know how those shows like the Ziegfeld and the Rockettes,
yep.
all those lines turn?
Yes.
Yep.
Well, she was at the end because she was the shortest.
She had to run
She had to run to catch up by the time they made the turn, so she'd be there in her spot.
So you were born into show business.
I was definitely born into show business, but my mother used to say I had 2 left feet, so I was not a dancer.
And then you moved out here, and you went to Fairfax High.
That's right. I went to Fairfax High.
And then after a stint in the Marines and the Navy?
That's right. I went to Fairfax High before the Marines and the Navy.
Did you volunteer, or were you drafted?
No, in those days you had to. There was a draft.
Service.
Yeah.
So I was in the Naval Reserve.
But your fame was as a basketball player.
I did play some basketball, yeah.
No, some basketball. Yeah, you told me a story when we were watching the Super Bowl the other day that you were offered kind of a career.
Not really.
Sports.
I wasn't that good.
That,
I wish I was, but no. I actually.
They just liked you on the team.
Well,
and wanted you
I
to
was
stay.
actually in the Navy. I was recruited to play football.
Oh,
Which was really kind of a funny story because when I was recruited to play football in school, in high school, I had grown from like 5'6" in my sophomore year.
Yeah.
By the time I was a senior, I was 5'8" or something like that. And then I grew 3 more inches, and then I was 5'11". Well, I thought I'd play football, but the coaches said, "Well, you didn't play as a junior. It's not fair to the other kids, so you can't play football." So I kept growing. And then one day this Navy chief came by and said, "You report to football practice." So I said, "I don't play football." He says, "You do now." So I went out for the football team, and I actually really enjoyed it. It was a lot of fun. In fact, I came pretty good at football, but we played. The Admirals were really gung ho and very competitive with each other.
Yes.
So we had to play the Marine Corps in a contest, for the championship of the 11th Naval District. And the Marines would say, when they were coming out to play us, they would say at quarterback from the University of Notre Dame. And they'd introduce this kid. He'd be huge.
Yeah.
And they'd say, at linebacker from Ohio State.
Holy
It'd be
mackerel.
so-and-so. And then from USC, the tight end is, and our coach would look at us and say, "Didn't any of you dummies go to school anywhere?"
Well, this must have been a combat sport like that must have really helped prepare you for the
For show business.
brutality of Hollywood.
I'll tell you what did prepare me for it. I was a neuropsychiatric technician in the Navy. So you had to go to a neuropsychiatric school and work with psychiatrists. And when they started with group therapy, which is I think the Navy may have been the first people to start with group therapy.
But
Yeah.
you started as an actor out here?
Yeah, I started as an actor.
Yeah.
With an famous actor coach named Jeff Corey.
Oh, very well known.
A well-known character actor, great actor.
Yeah.
And Leonard Nimoy was also one of my coaches.
Really?
Yeah, they were great.
But eventually, you wanted more job security. Is that what?
Yeah, there's no job security in acting.
Yeah,
if
yeah.
you can, that's why a lot of wealthy people. I don't know about Phil, but a lot of wealthy people get into the acting profession. They're supported by their families, as you know, and it happens that way oftentimes. And I say hooray for them. I mean, it's about stick-to-itiveness, and I think Jack Lemmon had the best line of all. He said, "If they'd have told me my chances of becoming successful were 1,000,000 to 1, it wouldn't have changed anything for me." I mean, if you don't have that kind of passion,
Yes, that's right.
then don't do it.
I was lucky because both your parents were in the business. My parents wanted to be in the business. Right. But your folks, did they try to manage you or handle you at all at that time?
No. I mean, when I told my parents that I wanted to be an actor, they shook it off. But I mean, my father had it in his blood. My father was a phenomenal dancer. He was MGM brought him out to California, and I think his first movie was Chocolate Soldier with Nelson Eddy and Jeanette McDonald.
Oh my goodness!
So I mean, he had a real passion for it. He loved it. And I loved watching him, and he was phenomenal at it.
But then you came up during a sea change in Hollywood when the pictures, the motion picture business was waning, and the television industry was dominating. You were in the middle of this?
I think I started agenting in '63, but I think at the time, I mean, it was kind of like towards the end of the golden era of Hollywood.
Yeah.
Because a lot of the people that I worked with or came across, were there in the 30s and 40s. There were a lot of actors, I mean, I remember Henry Wilcoxon was an old character actor who was very good friends with Cecil B. DeMille. And that was the old funny story about Cecil B. DeMille with multiple cameras on Ben-Hur, which Henry Wilcoxon was one of the stars of.
My goodness.
The first Ben-Hur. Or maybe it was... Yeah, it was like the early Ben-Hur that Henry Wilcoxon was in, and he was a wonderful character actor, a granite jaw, big man, great stature, and he would tell me the stories about working with DeMille and stuff like that. And at that point in time, it was an era that the stars wouldn't do television. I mean, they just wouldn't.
They wouldn't do commercials, and they wouldn't do television.
They wouldn't do talk shows.
And they wouldn't do talk shows.
Case in point.
Robert Mitchum used to tell me, I don't do talk shows. And I would say, well, Bob, aren't you going to be, don't you think that it would help promote? I don't want to hear that nonsense. I'm not doing television. And I think toward the end of his career, probably he might have changed his point about that.
When he saw
but it was, but he was a guy that actually believed that, he told me he used to do 3 movies a week. He'd be over on the RKO lot, and he'd work, be a bad guy. Then he'd go over to Fox and do a couple of lines, and as on another movie. Sometimes he was able to do like the same day. He'd go from one studio to the other.
Gosh.
So if you see these early pictures of the late 30s, early 40s, you'll see him in some of these movies where he's billed second to last on the screen. And you go, wow. I mean, he really came through within.
Now, did you just know him, or did you?
Yeah, I knew him very well because his son was a client of mine, James.
Oh, I see.
And I knew them very well, and he was great. He had an amazing memory. I mean, he could
really
pick up a script and learn half the script by lunchtime if you gave it to him in the morning.
What a gift that is.
He had a tremendous gift.
Where were you happiest? Were you happy as an agent? Did you find more comfort there?
Well, I told Phil earlier.
Yeah.
I've been an agent. I've been a manager. I've been a producer. And and sometimes you go backwards. Sometimes you've been a manager, an agent, and a producer again, and a producer, and then a manager. I mean, it really kind of got to be a joke in the last couple of decades because now they have 14 people that are credited as producers.
Right.
And if you run into some of these characters, you say, "What did you have to do with the movie?" Well, it's my movie. Well, how is it your movie? Well, I'm a producer. I said, perhaps there's a reason they only allow 3 people on stage during Oscar time that have producer credits, and everybody else is sitting in the back or home watching it on television.
You produced a couple of films, Death Before Dishonor, Merchants of War, and you produced the TV series Hunter.
Correct.
So when was Hunter on?
I think the end of the 80s.
End of the 80s.
To like 91 maybe, something like that.
Oh, okay.
It had a run for about 6 seasons. We didn't do it for the 6 seasons. We did it for the last couple of seasons.
I see. And how did you see the TV business evolve? I mean, it's completely different now, of course.
Well, there's one thing about the TV business that you have to understand. That the executive producer is usually the showrunner, is the guy that creates it. But, it's interesting that if you come out of film, you'll find the process is different in movies by far. Because directors don't edit television. The executive producers usually are the ones that do the editing.
Post-production.
They oversee the post and they have the final cut.
Yes.
The director, if he's doing an hour show, or I don't even know in this day and age if you do a half hour, that's and they do it in front of an audience.
Yes.
That it goes to it's edited. By the producers, the executive producer has a say about it. But the directors, when I was doing television, it was they prep a week and they shoot a week, and that's how it would be. But you got to remember, if you had a show at that time, they would order a season was 22 episodes.
That's right.
So,
and this was a 3-network universe, so it was by default had huge audience numbers. So the scale of economics was just much bigger. Right?
Well, you would negotiate what they call a license fee with the studio, which would be one of the networks, and they would give you negotiate a number that you would make all the episodes for, and you had to make that money last, and if you were going over or on a show, you couldn't go over on a show. If you took 7 days to shoot an episode, that was it. But if you went over, you were in trouble because you had to make it up on another show. So by making it up, you would end up be on the sound stage the whole time rather than going on outside locations because it costs more money to shoot outside than it does to shoot on
What would
stage.
happen if it just was a mess and you ended up banking it?
Somebody else would have your job.
Pretty quick, huh?
The networks had all the power, that way.
Yes.
But it was a lot of fun, but it was exhausting work because you're prepping a show, you're shooting a show, and you have a show in post.
Now, did you have writers, or were you?
Oh yeah, you have a staff of writers, and
but ultimately, did you make the creative decisions on story and the whole thing?
Well, what they would do is they would come in and pitch us the show. And oftentimes when you have a staff, in our case, we had like 4 writers that were on the staff. So sometimes if they get behind, one writer would write the first act, a different writer on the staff would write the second act. There'd be 4 writers writing on one episode. But that wasn't the ideal situation.
4 writers in the sky.
Yeah, ghost writers.
Yeah, ghost writers.
So this is how it would typically go in a normal situation. But then you got involved in the talent end of the business. You had an agency called Fame.
Well, yeah, I had an agency called Fame, but before we started Fame, which was Film Artist Management Enterprises, but we had, I worked for other agencies. I worked for some really, the first great agent I thought that I worked for was a gentleman named William Velasco. And he was very smart. At 24, he was the first vice president at GAC, which was a major agency at the time.
24.
Yeah,
Wow.
20. He was incredible. He was nattily dressed always. And I remember that I had already worked in a couple of small agencies that were absorbed by the agency that Billy had. And I thought I knew what I was doing, but I wasn't sure. And I was kind of faking it a little bit. And I got a call one day, and it was the head of talent at Columbia Pictures. And he says to me, I want to make a deal with you for Tab Hunter. I want him for this picture. And Billy had walked in from his office, and I said, Billy Gordon wants to make a deal for Tab. He says, keep going. You do it. And he put his thing. So he starts negotiating with me, head of casting for Columbia. Now, by this time, I'm perspiring through my shirt, and he's telling me this is this. And Billy is telling him, putting his hand over the phone, and he's telling me, no, ask for this. Tell me you want that. I said, yeah, you heard me. Go ahead, do that one. So I say
Cyrano de Bergerac.
Yeah, I mean, so it was exactly right. Cyrano de Bergerac. He's feeding me the lines. And at the end of the day, I'm going, I'm not going to get all this. So all of a sudden, at the end of the conversation, about 15, 20 minutes later, he says to me, okay, we have a deal. We have a deal, right? And Billy smiles at me, the boss, and I said, yes, we have a deal. He says, okay. He says, I hang up the phone, and Mr. Velasco looks at me. He says, next time you'll do it yourself. And he walked out of the room, and that was...
Wow.
And I went,
okay.
I got it.
Got it, coach.
The truisms of Hollywood. Phil famously likes to say Hollywood's the only town where you get stabbed in the front. And when I first moved here, I did a piece for NPR on the art of the Hollywood pitch. Yeah. And I spoke to Carl Gottlieb and David Sheffield and his partner, Barry Blaustein, who wrote all of Eddie Murphy's movies. And they explained to me that, I said, how's it work? And they said, well, there's only a handful of people in Hollywood that have the power to say yes. So everybody else's job is to come up with creative ways to say no. And they said, here are the warning signs. If you make a pitch and they go, that's great, that's fantastic, I'm going to have my lawyers contact you. He said, you're dead. You're screwed. You're dead in the water. Now these are people who have generated $1 billion in box office, so they've had these experiences. What was your experience? Well, as an agent, you're pitching the stories to producers or directors, and then before the writer gets in the room, or before you give them the script, you got to get them interested in it.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And I used to pitch them, and I tell them the whole thing, and I get all up in how to do that. And, it's going to be this, and it's going to be that, and then all of a sudden, I send over the script, and then I get a phone call, Kubick, if the story you pitched me was in the movie, I'd have made that story. But that's not in it's not in the script. So I would go, yeah, he's right.
All these script things. You have a connection with Sylvester Stallone.
Yeah.
Evidently, Sylvester Stallone has been out there saying that he feels cheated and slighted about his Rocky franchise, particularly the first 3 films of Rocky, that he didn't own it.
I think it was first 3 rounds. Actually.
The first 3 rounds, yeah. Right. And I saw that your former partner, who is now gone, but his son wrote to his father's defense saying, that's not quite how it went down.
Yeah, I know.
And it's just interesting because you made the deal for the first Rocky movie.
Yeah,
you made this mythical experience happen that we've all heard, that Sly Stallone was, trying to make it. He was in a walk-up somewhere in Hell's Kitchen, New York, and he decided to sit down for a weekend and write Rocky, and he did it, but he wouldn't sell it unless he could be star, and he did it, and it's a great Hollywood story. That's what we've all been told. Okay. Now, you made the deal, so tell us, how true is that?
Okay. The part that's true?
Yeah.
Yes. This will only take a second.
Well, actually, I first found him when I had seen Lords of Flatbush.
Right.
And I walked into Columbia Pictures for a meeting at Bob Ravelson's company. And he was in the lobby waiting for a meeting, an audition for something. Mm-hmm. And I saw him there. We chatted, and I gave him a card. And he called me that day, and he came over, and we talked. And I said, I like what I saw you in Lords of Flatbush. I like the work you did. And I think maybe we could make something happen. I didn't know anything else, but, So we agreed, and I said, okay. I brought in a couple of the other agents that were working with us there. And I said, let's give it a shot with this kid. So he called me soon thereafter.
He was unsigned at the time?
He had been with the Morris office, I think.
Morris, big agency.
Okay. From New York, when he was in New York, I think. And so what had happened was he told me he was a writer also, and I went, really? He says, yeah, can I bring you a couple of scripts? I said, sure, bring me a couple of scripts. So he brought me a couple of scripts. And we also had a very serious literary business. My partner was primarily ran the literary department because he only represented writers and directors, and I basically represented writers, directors, and the talent. And
is this Craig Rumar?
This is Craig Rumar.
Rumar.
And Craig didn't really have all that much to do with actors, and I couldn't blame him for that. But, so we read a couple of his scripts, and I thought one of them might be pretty good. Now, I have a dear friend named Gene Kirkwood who is a producer today, and he had a deal with Chartoff and Winkler, and they had a production deal with MGM and United Artists, and their deal was that they were producing the first couple of pictures. I think were Presley Pictures, and they did a picture with Bronson, and so they were starting to
big
really gear up to do some good movies. These guys. And Gene was working over there, and they brought him on as a producer. He was a writer and a producer, and he brought me over there for a meeting with Chartoff and Winkler, and they said, look, if you bring us a project and we make it, we'll give you the same deal we do with a couple other agencies. And I said, what's that? They said, we'll give you a piece of our end of the picture. So I said, okay.
Net points.
That sounds fair, yeah.
Not gross.
No. Nobody's getting gross in those days.
That's gross.
Yeah.
Although I
say
the day will come, and I was right.
And what that means for people who don't know, net is a percentage of the declared profits. Gross is off the top.
Off the top, which is $1 at the box office.
And net is often considered sucker points.
Well, they can say that, but
Yeah,
because I haven't had points in 50 movies. I only saw profits from a couple.
Right.
But the reality of it was that I had read this script project by Sly, and I'd given it to Chartoff Winkler, and they said they would do it. They ran Lords of Flatbush. But they had a deal with United Artists where any picture that they made that was $2 million or less, United Artists only had to approve the director and the budget, the final budget, but they didn't have say over who was in it. Chartoff and Winkler had total control over all those things, the creative elements. So I gave them this project, and we started negotiating with United Artists. And the Morris office called me and said, he doesn't own the script. I said, what are you talking about?
Stallone doesn't own the script he was selling.
You're negotiating. That's what they told me. So he admitted to me that actually he had signed something or taken some money because he needed it. And I said, yeah, but you didn't tell us that. And now you just could end up in a lawsuit. And I can guarantee you, that I'll try, but I don't think that Charlie Winkler will touch it with a 10-foot pole. So I set up a meeting, and Charlie Winkler said, look, we like the kid, but, tell him to bring us something else, and we'll talk about it. We'll see what it is. So then he pitched me some idea about, somebody who runs for mayor. And I said, that's not going to work.
Oh, this was Stallone wrote this. I had this idea of a cab driver in New York running for mayor.
Yeah, something like that, a cab driver. And they said, that's not going to work. You got to have something more that's going to take off with some bang.
Yeah.
So he called me the next day, and I guess he had watched the Chuck Wepner fight or something. And then he said, what about a fighter who runs for, a fighter
who goes
his
for
life?
The big stakes.
I said, yeah, okay. That sounds more realistic. Write the script. So my understanding was he dictated the script to his wife, Sasha, at the time, and they came up with the script and brought it to us, and then we gave it to...
Did he name it Rocky?
I think that was on the title. Rocky, I think, was the name of his dog.
No,
Butkus was the name of the dog.
Butkus?
Right.
Butkus. That would have been a good title.
He had a pug named Butkus.
Butkus 3.
I think it was. So anyway, we negotiated a deal, and in the first deal, he did get... he got paid for the script because you had to, because they were signature of the guilds. So I don't know what the fee, remember what the number was, but he had to make at least $25,000. Mike could take about it. And probably did it for scale, whatever it was. And that was okay. But I think he got points in the picture, as I recall. I think he had 10 points in the picture. But, again, there were net points.
Right.
Because he wasn't getting gross money on the pictures. So I don't know all the deals that were made subsequently after that because I was only involved in negotiating on the first two pictures.
But did he insist that he was going to play the lead?
Well, what happened was I was told by United Artists that Mike Medavoy, and I loved Mike. Mike's a terrific guy and very bright.
All big
but
names.
Mike loved the script, and he was head of production for UA. But Mike, so Gene Kirkwood said to me, Mike loves the script. And what does that mean? No, Mike really loves the script. I said, really?
Really?
He said, but he loves it for Jimmy Caan.
For James Caan.
James Caan. Who would have been a great Rocky.
Yeah.
Oh, my God.
Well, so I said, that is not going to happen. He said, well, will he sell the script? No. I said, he's not going to sell the script. I said, how about if I just burn the script? Because if he doesn't do this movie, he's going to be playing Italian heavies for the rest of his career.
Yeah.
This is the kid's shot. And he's not, you're not going to get to do it with Jimmy Caan. As a matter of fact, I said, when I negotiated the contract, we insisted that his contract stipulate they didn't have the right to replace him until 18 days of principal photography. That's because the whole schedule of principal photography was 36 days. And I knew if they were going to shoot half the movie with him, there was no way they were going to shoot him for 5 days and then say, oh, we don't like him. He's done with paying him.
Right.
So they said, well, we don't give that deal to McQueen. I said, McQueen doesn't need it. So they agreed to that.
They agreed
somehow. And
so you really were the person behind protecting him that way.
Yeah.
So you were his agent.
Oh, I was his agent.
Right. So you really did protect him.
Yeah. Well, we were trying to protect him. Yeah, absolutely. And that's exactly what happened. Now, as the years went on, I don't know how many times it was renegotiated. I mean, obviously he's still doing Rocky movies. He did Creed.
Right.
Creed 1, Creed 2 is Rocky.
Creed 3, we're going to go see this weekend.
So this perhaps manufactured controversy in the media about him complaining about the early Rocky pictures that he was sort of didn't get his just desserts.
Poor guy.
I mean, I don't get that because they did gamble on an unknown with an unknown script.
Well, the guy that I have to give a lot of credit to is somebody that you guys have never heard of. His name is David Weitzner. And David Weitzner was the ad pub guy at United Artists. And he came up with this sell-through line, which was Rocky. His whole life was $1 million to one shot. Now, who doesn't want to see a movie about
right.
somebody who doesn't have a 1,000,001 shot?
And to Stallone's credit, he was terrific in that
he
role.
was. And the picture was, well, story aside was, I was a huge fan of Lee J. Cobb. And I was fortunate enough to have dinner with him one night at another actor named late Jimmy Hampton house. And Lee was there for dinner with his wife, Mary. And I was a huge fan of Lee J. Cobb. So I said to him, when I got the Rocky script, I said to them when they were going to put together the Rocky movie, I said to those guys, the producers, I think I could get Lee J. Cobb to read this for you. So he said, really? I said, yeah, let me give you the script. So I gave Lee J. Cobb the script and he read it. And he said he liked it. So I set up a meeting for Lee with, I didn't represent him. Another friend of mine did at the time. So we set up a meeting, and Lee went to meet with John Avildsen, who was the directing it. John Avildsen, and I knew John from back in the day. And John said to Lee, I'd like you to read for me.
Oh.
And Lee got up and said, I'm going to tell you the same thing I told Arthur Miller. So what's that? Go screw yourself. And he walked out of the room. And that was the end of Lee J. Cobb.
What's interesting is that Lawrence is being very kind and respecting the FCC. Because when you speak to Lawrence about the business off microphone, it's very colorful,
language.
And so another interesting Zelig moment for you. You represented Peter Fonda.
Correct.
And so you didn't work on the original Easy Rider, but there was talk of a sequel apparently.
Yeah, well, he asked me to come over because he was in the hospital. And I think he was having his ankle fixed. And
from a motorcycle
accident. Yeah, from a motorcycle accident he had years before. So I went over to the hospital with Cedars and I walked in the room and he's there with Dennis Hopper, and they say, "Sit down. We want to pitch you something." I said, okay. So I sat down, and they both start working on me. And I'm looking at them, and I'm trying to figure out what they're talking about. And I said, there's only one problem with what you guys just pitched me. I said, what? I said, this is after Easy Rider, right? Yeah. You both died in Easy Rider. They said, we know that. This is going to be like, this takes place. Well, I remember now he said, this takes place in heaven or something. It opens in heaven.
Really?
Oh my God. I said, give me whatever you're smoking.
Needless to say, it didn't happen.
Well, actually, they got the financing.
They did
to develop it, and I don't know what happened after that, but it didn't get made. I do know that. But it was fun.
And getting back to this theme about your psychological training background and some of the more colorful performers that you represented, one of my favorites, Rip Torn, who was
I love
legendary. Not only was he fantastic, I loved him in everything he did.
Yeah, he was great.
He was truly great, but he was part of that reason was he was a dangerous character on screen. I mean, he was volatile. That's what was exciting about him. And in real life, how was it, managing him?
Well, I'll tell you a very funny story about him. I had a character actor, terrific actor. His name was Percy Rodriguez, and he was black, and he was like 6'2" and a little older, but handsome man, really handsome man, wonderful actor. From Canada. He was from Canada. Great credits. So he was doing Blues for Mr. Charlie by James Baldwin on Broadway.
Beautiful.
With Rip.
Wow.
So they were sharing a dressing room. So Percy says that every time he'd come into his dressing room and there would be Rip's props all over its dressing table. His side of the dressing table, Percy's side of the dressing table, it made Percy crazy. He said, I finally had enough. So I got to the theater. He wasn't there. I brought in a garbage can, took all of Rip's props, threw them all in the garbage can, took them out in the back of the theater, and dumped them in the garbage.
Oh!
So Rip came in, which is always was with the last minute thing with him, and none of his props were there. So he said, "Where's all my props?" And Percy says, I don't know. This was the way it was when I came in. He said he went completely crazy because he didn't have any of his props. He said he probably gave his best performance that night.
Because he was so upset.
Now, props, you don't mean the props.
The little hand props that he used for his character.
Really? He actually had all, that was how he got his inspiration and getting the character with. Oh, how bizarre.
He was a wonderful actor.
Oh, I totally
He was
agree.
incredibly consummate and really worked at it. And
A method actor from the other story you mentioned about when he was due on a set and he didn't appear.
Well, yeah, I mean...
Oh, yeah.
I mean, he would... I do remember, yeah. That
there was a method to his madness.
Yeah, he had done... I think we had got him a Gunsmoke or something, and he was playing an Indian or something.
And he was in New York at the time.
And, yeah, and we'd fly him out.
Yeah.
So I was sitting at lunch somewhere and having a nice lunch at the Playboy Club, and I got a phone call from the producers. They said, "Where's Rip?" So what do you mean, where's Rip? Isn't he over at the studio? They said, "We haven't seen him.
Oh my God.
We shoot this tomorrow."
Oh my God.
I have to call you back.
And this is, of course, before cell phones, so you really had to find somebody.
Yeah, I had to find somebody. So I found
The bunny probably helped you.
I found his house, and Jerry Page, his wife, answered the phone. I said, "Jerry, where's Rip?" She said, "Well, darling, he left yesterday." I said, "Where did he go?" She said, "He's in Oklahoma on an Indian reservation." I said, "What the hell is he doing on an Indian reservation?" She said, "Well, this is his number. You can reach him there." I called him. I said, "What the hell are you doing in Oklahoma?" He says, "I'm meeting with the chief of the tribe." I said, "I want to get research for the character, because I'm playing a chief." I said, "Rip, you're shooting tomorrow." He said, "Just tell him to pick out my wardrobe, they give my sizes, and I'll be there." And he was, but it was like you always had to hold your breath. You never know how it would be.
You mentioned a very funny story about how he and Steve McQueen had a wardrobe sort of story.
Well,
With emphasis on the war.
Yes.
Well, Rip had, they were. The way Rip used to tell me was they used to be really tight back in the days in New York when they were at the studio.
Steve McQueen and Rip Torn.
Steve and
they were studying
and
together.
Rip, they ride motorcycles, they date the same girls.
Yeah.
They were characters. And then Steve came and had his breakout movie, In Love with a Proper Stranger, I think, with Natalie Wood or something it was, and he became a movie star.
Right.
And this is, after Wanted, Dead or Alive, but there was a big hype about Steve at the time. So we got him the Rip, major role in Cincinnati Kid.
Uh-huh.
And he came out from New York, and my job was to take him over to MGM and take him to the wardrobe, make sure he got wardrobe and everything was okay.
A lot of hands-on stuff.
So
Huh?
he and I go to the commissary, and we're having lunch, and Steve walks in and comes over, and Steve's got this big grin on his face and says, "How you doing, guys? Rip, great to see you. I'm so glad we're going to be working together, buddy. It's going to be great." And Rip froze, kind of like, good to see you, yeah. And he walked away, and I said, "What's wrong?"
What was that?
And he says, "We used to be real pals." I said, "Yeah, I know that. I heard you told me that." He says, "Well, after he's doing that picture with Natalie Wood, whatever it was, he says, I was on the lot doing a television show, and I stopped by, I was in the commissary, and there he was. I walked over, and he said, 'Steve, how you doing?' I started talking to him, and he went, he gave me the cold shoulder.
Oh.
So, the heck with him." And I went, "Yeah, okay, I understand, I get it." So we will finish lunch. He and I walk over to the wardrobe department. Wardrobe man comes out, and he says, "Mr. Torn, we have your wardrobe here." And he says, "How?" And he starts showing Rip's suits. And the first one he holds up, and Rip looks at it and says, "I'm not wearing that kind of crap." And then he puts it down and brings out another suit. He said, and they were progressively worse. By the third suit, Rip is going like, "I'm not wearing that stuff. Do you think I'm playing in this movie? I'm not doing this. I'm not a character." And he says, "But Mr. Torn, these are the suits Mr. McQueen picked out for you."
He was quite a joker. That Steve McQueen used to hang out. Robert Mitchum, Alan Shepard at a place that still exists, Chez J out in Santa Monica.
That's where we started our show out there.
Chez J was a place that celebrities could go and feel comfortable because no
They
paparazzi
had a
were
little
involved.
back room.
They had back rooms where Marilyn waited to see John Kennedy down at Peter Lawford's house on the beach. I mean, it was that kind of a place.
Wow.
They had peanuts on the floor. It's one of their trademarks.
Yeah, and it didn't have the best of odors, but
So they went.
it was a little place.
It was a little place, but Alan Shepard said to Jay, who owned the restaurant, he said, "Hey, I'm going to take one of these peanuts to the moon," and he did on Apollo 14. On Apollo 14, so he came back from the moon. He's sitting at the bar with Robert Mitchum and Steve McQueen. And he goes, "Hey, man, this is the peanut I took to the moon." And McQueen said, "Oh, yeah, let me see that." He takes it, ate it.
Yeah, I think that's probably right.
You also work with Jon Voight.
I think that you talk about aging it, all right, and you got to be really thick-skinned. In two instances like that, it was like for Peter Fonda, as an example I'm talking about, is he was up for a movie, and it was I can't remember the title, but it was with I think it was Elizabeth Ashley was in it, and Brian Denny was in it, and the movie in itself was about a cult hero, a cult figure, who would take teenagers off the street, and then they do all kinds of mischievous and evil things. And
it's a true story.
Yeah, well, right. And Peter was going to be the leader of the cult, and they wouldn't meet with him. So I went back about 5 or 6 times, and they still wouldn't meet with him. I think Ted Kotcheff ended up directing it, and I finally went back for the 5th or 6th time, and I had said to them, "Look, there's no bigger cult hero than Captain America. So if you don't want to have Captain America play this cult hero in your movie, then you don't have the sense
And
God,
just for people
God
who don't
gave
know,
you."
Captain America was the character that he played in Easy Rider.
That was the character.
Yeah, and originally it was going to be called something like Captain America, but Marvel wouldn't let him use the
whatever
title.
the thing it was.
All right, so Mr. Captain America. Okay.
Right. So they finally broke down, and I set up a meeting for Peter with Ted Kotcheff at the Bel Air Hotel. And he said, "Are you going to be there?" I said, "No, I'm not going to be there. It's just going to be you and Ted. I don't want to be there. It's better if you just get into talking about what you're going to talk about."
Yep.
And he might have some questions for you. So after that meeting, they offered me the part. But it was like it took, I don't know how many times, 5 or 6 times. And a similar thing happened with Jon Voight in Coming Home. Now, they offered John the role of the husband that Bruce Dern inevitably ended up playing. And John didn't want to do it. So Jane was one of the producers, and Hal Ashby was the director. And Hal's wife was an actress that I represented at the time, or soon before then.
Small world it all was.
A girl, actress named Joan Marshall, wonderful lady, terrific actress. But what happened was that they said, "No, we're going to offer it to Jack Nicholson." And I went, "Jesus." I said, "You got to be kidding." So they did offer it to Jack, and Jack said, "I'm done playing guys in hospitals." This was after Cuckoo's Nest.
Cuckoo's Nest. Right.
So he wouldn't do it. So I went back again, and I said, you've got to really seriously consider John."
Yeah.
So in the meantime, Jane had a rally at the Beverly Hilton Hotel, an
This is
anti-war
Jane Fonda
rally.
we're talking about.
Jane Fonda, an anti-war rally, I think it
Yeah.
was, or something. So John
Sure.
says, "I think we should go." I said, "Yeah, you're right, we should." So he and I walk into the Hilton Hotel, and there's all these people with suits taking our pictures. And I said, "John, those guys aren't photojournalists, right?" And he said, "Yeah, I think you're right." I said, "So I want to thank you for getting me on the FBI's most attendance tonight." So what happened after that, they finally, and I drove out to Jerry Hellman's house in Malibu, and I said, "Jerry, you got to let him come in for this movie. You got to really." And Jerry had already produced Midnight Cowboy with him, so it wasn't like he didn't know what John could do.
Oh my gosh!
And I said, he's not going to play the husband. He's not going to play it. So if you want him for this movie, he's going to have to play this guy. And Jane thought about it and finally said, I remember the line they said to me. This was after Midnight Cowboy. This is what this business is about. Mike Medavoy doesn't think he's a movie star. I said, I don't care if Mike doesn't think he's a movie star or not, but you can't name me 10 actors in this town that are better actors than Jon. So you should think about that. So at this point in time, they turned around and they offered him, and he won the Oscar.
That's right.
Wow. So when I saw him not too long ago, he hugged me and thanked me again. I said, for what? He said, the thing. Which thing?
Well, that's nice. A long memory.
So talent agents have a bad rap.
Sometimes deserved.
I'm sure. But, looking back now at the career of, how cutthroat, how was it an honor among thieves? What was the currency for you? I mean, what made you, obviously, you speak your mind, you're a football player, you are brilliant, and you are imposing. And I'm sure that helped.
And you were successful.
And you were successful at what you did. But what is the form of integrity in that
honor among thieves?
Yeah, honor among is that a cheap shot to say it's honor among thieves? I mean, what is it?
Let me explain something to you, if I may. An agent's word in California can bind you.
By law.
By law. That's a fact. So if your agent says you'll agree to something, you know, then you've agreed to it. Mm-hmm. But the fact of getting you to perform is not always the same thing, And the reality of all that comes to pass when you get into these kinds of situations where it's very competitive, and like the joke was, your best friend in Hollywood, he's the one who'll stab you in the chest. Mm-hmm. But, the reality of it is when you're representing talent and you're representing not just actors, because I represented writers, I represented directors, and I can't tell you how many times that would come into pass, and you had to go and you had to win over in film. You have to have the director on board with you, for him. Mm-hmm. And I can remember one time I had a client that she wrote a script and major company wanted to do it at Warner Brothers. They had a deal there, and we were going to do it, and she was going to do it, and I had Brenda Bluffin attached to it and somebody else attached to it, and the director that we had who had co-written the script with my client who came up with the original idea for it. So I tied him to it because I wanted to get him a chance to direct a movie. He had done a couple of movies. So we got in the meeting with the head of production for the company, the guy that owned it. And he was a notoriously difficult guy. And with his whole creative team in the room to pitch the movie. And he walked in the room and sat down, the head of the company, and he said, now tell me how you guys are going to make all this money for me, and I'm going to get all kinds of awards. So now tell me what the movie is about, right? So this guy, this director, froze. In the meeting, he couldn't get through the opening of the pitch. And I knew I was in deep trouble. So I jumped in, and she jumped in, and we started pitching the movie. Now, I had already brought in half the financing. Right. I brought in the guy that was putting up half the financing, the tax shelter deals, and they were going to come up and do the balance of the money, and it didn't happen.
So the moral of this story is that you were a facilitator, and you're working between giant egos, some eccentricities, a little madness, and somehow you're putting it together, and then an agent gets a rap for being sort of. But I mean that in a complimentary way. It's like you are making things happen.
You got to be inventive.
Very difficult people.
But what impresses me about all your stories is these are real people that you're interacting with, and you have relationships with these people. And that to me is real Hollywood.
Yeah.
Because so many deals used to be made at parties in the old days. Well, our party's over for today.
That went so quickly. Lawrence Kubick, thank you so much.
Thank you for the insights.
It was really a delight and it was very fascinating. And thank you.
Come across the street anytime you want.
You got it.
We'll have some coffee.
This is Phil and Ted's Sexy Boomer Show, heard every week on KPFK at
1 to 2.
And also you can go to our website, sexyboomershow.com.
All right. Thanks, my friends. Stay tuned.